I think with that we can start. Thank you so much, John, for agreeing to present. John is a senior research scientist at WRI, World Resources Institute, and today he will be talking about one of the work. He has shared paper and everything that I'll share with the group in a bit here, but this came out recently that uses MAXAR and ALS data to predict the tree height. This work he has done in California and Sao Paulo in Brazil, and he will talk about this work today. Thank you again, John, for agreeing to present, and take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Biplav. Hi, everyone. My name is John. I'm a data scientist at the World Resources Institute. I've been here for 5 or 6 years. I work on our restoration team, so I'm really invested in monitoring tree cover gain and carbon on restoration projects. I'll be talking today about some work that we've been doing with Meta, Michigan State University, University of Florida, and a couple other partners on developing foundation models to do high-resolution tree counting and height mapping with the ultimate goal of getting to carbon and being able to count trees on restoration systems. I'm going to start with a little bit of background about why we have started this research project in the first place. Our organization runs a restoration finance portfolio called TerraFund, where we make direct philanthropic and low interest loans and grants to small scale restoration nonprofits and enterprises currently across Africa, now expanding to India. We, I believe, now have over $40 million that we've distributed to restoration enterprises and to restoration nonprofits, and our organization does the entire process from doing requests for proposals, reviewing proposals, distributing finance, and then working on the monitoring, reporting, and verification of these tree-based restoration projects. My team specifically works on that last piece, the MRV of these projects. And these projects range from agroforestry projects, like here on the left is Zoe in Malawi, where degraded cropland is being intercropped with agroforestry tree species, to something like doing enrichment planting in forest reserves. So here's the Thuma Forest Reserve in the Great Rift Valley in Kenya, which is another one of our TerraFund grant recipients. And we distribute money and capital to these organizations to be able to support nursery development, to be able to support jobs for tree planting and distribution of trees to farmers and whatnot. Like here on the left is Zoe in Malawi, where degraded cropland is being intercropped with agroforestry tree species, to something like doing enrichment planting in forest reserves. So here's the Thuma Forest Reserve in the Great Rift Valley in Kenya, which is another one of our TerraFund grant recipients. And we distribute money and capital to these organizations to be able to support nursery development, to be able to support jobs for tree planting and distribution of trees to farmers and whatnot. And as part of this, we track the progress at the portfolio scale, because this is ultimately a philanthropic goal of working towards the AFR 100 goal of putting 100 million hectares of land under restoration by 2030. So this is an example of the kind of metrics that we track at a portfolio scale. We look at the hectares restored, the jobs created, the number of enterprises that are receiving funding from us, the total number of trees that have been planted here as reported by the projects, and we're tracking how these evolve over time. We want to separate out monitoring, reporting, and verification for this kind of work. So monitoring is sort of more on the research side of collecting and analyzing data and information to measure progress towards goals. We see reporting as the data that's reported from the projects to us. So projects fill out 6-month interim reports where they tell us how many trees they planted, where they planted the trees, how many jobs they've created, what kind of beneficiaries they've been supporting, what kind of nurseries they've been developing, those kinds of things. And then lastly, we think about verification, which is supporting or subjecting that reported information to a third party or independent review. And so, for instance, if a project tells us, well, in June 2022, we planted 10,000 trees in this area. We want to be able to independently go in and say, can we verify that 10,000 trees have been planted and survived in that specific area? And to do that, actually, I'm going to skip ahead here. We start with polygons. So we spend a lot of time working with these individual projects and organizations and enterprises to really map out in very high detail where they are doing tree planting activities with the money that we were distributing to them. And we, on the remote sensing side, we aim to use large-scale foundation models and MAXAR imagery to be able to count trees and measure canopy height for these early-stage restoration projects. We're also doing quite a lot of field sampling and field verification, and tying in field sampling approaches with our remote sensing approaches, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But I want to start by talking about the work that we're doing to develop foundation models and utilize high-resolution imagery in order to get at this question of how many trees have been planted, what's the canopy height across these projects, and ultimately, what's the carbon sequestration look like across these projects. So I'm going to be starting by presenting a paper that we recently published in Remote Sensing of Environment called Very High Resolution Canopy Height Maps from RGB. I'm not going to read the rest of this title, but the paper has been shared with you all, and it's open source on Remote Sensing of Environment. And the code and the model weights and the inference script has been released on Facebook Research's GitHub repository under a repo called High Res Canopy Height, where you can bring your own imagery, any RGB imagery that's below 2 meter ground sampling distance, and run inference, or utilize the foundation model aspect of things to generate your features and your embeddings, and take that and run your own sort of downstream segmentation or object detection or pixel regression task. This is what the canopy height data looks like for the contiguous US. Here, this is at a 0.5 meter resolution. So on Earth Engine, this is about 8 or so terabytes of data that we put onto Earth Engine over the past month. We have all of Africa that we've also processed. We've also processed all of South America and all of Europe, and are working on processing Asia. We're just trying to figure out how to get 50 terabytes of data into Earth Engine in order to fully be able to release this. While ultimately we aim to get all of this data into Earth Engine, I can actually put this in the chat soon. All of this data is also on the AWS Open Data Portal, so you can directly download the geotiffs from there as well. This is what our canopy height data looks like. This is for some of the selective logging, or not selective, this is for some of the clear-cut logging sites where I'm from in Oregon, along the Oregon coast, where you can see the sort of patches of logging and what the regrowth looks like throughout these different patches. Here, where darker blue is a lower canopy height, and yellow to greenish is a higher canopy height. Here's an example of an open canopy forest where we can see the different sort of individual trees and clusters of trees and attach height values to each of these trees. Here is data in the Great Rift Valley in Kenya, where we can see canopy height estimates for these boundary plantings across these agroforestry systems that are very prevalent in the areas surrounding Nairobi, where the crops here are tea, and then the areas where we can see canopy height are the agroforestry trees that line the farms. Some examples, just showing some figures from the paper on the left. Some more examples of what the canopy height data looks like. On the right, here are some comparisons with other large-scale canopy height products. So here, this is the ETH-Zurich paper, Lang et al. 2022. And this is the UMD canopy height paper that's based on JEDI and Landsat data. And then here's our canopy height model. So you can see for an area like this, where we're looking at an open canopy system, we can attach height to every single tree here, whereas obviously the lower resolution products are looking at lower resolution canopy height data. One thing that we find really important is that when we're looking at open canopy systems and agroforestry systems, the RH95, the 95th percentile canopy height, doesn't matter as much as looking at an area and being able to ascribe what the variability in canopy height is, right? Because in an agroforestry system, if you look at the RH95, only the agroforest trees are going to be above that 95th percentile because they're going to be the really tall trees. And what we really want to know is how does the canopy height vary across an agroforestry site, because that variation in canopy height is going to be really important for the carbon calculations. So I'm going to step back actually and think a little bit more about what foundation models are, why we chose to do a foundation model for this approach, and then how we're using this foundation model in order to answer other questions. And to do that, I think it's important to separate the sort of fields of doing remote sensing with deep learning into three fields. There's the sort of convolutional neural networks approach, which have between 5 and 30 million parameters. You might be familiar with UNets or MAXAR CNNs or retina nets or YOLO models or things like that. Towards more recently, in the past couple of years, the introduction of vision transformers, which tend to be much larger in the number of trainable parameters, between 200 million to a billion. And some model names that you might be familiar with for that are things like vision transformers or VITs, SWIN transformers, different decoders that get used with vision transformers like dense prediction with DPT, or VIT detection, or real-time detection with RT-DETR. And then on the last, we think about foundation models, which are pre-training a vision transformer on a really large-scale self-supervised task or on a lot of large-scale benchmark datasets to release a vision transformer that's been pre-trained and then can be fine-tuned on a domain-specific task. So when we think about convolutional neural networks and how they get used for remote sensing, oftentimes it's easy to understand them as just a series of small convolutions that take an input and map it to a dense feature space, and then take that dense feature space and map it to an output. So with something like a unit, you take your spectral data as input, you apply it progressively a series of convolutional operations, you map it to a low resolution, high dimensional feature space, and you take that low resolution, high dimensional feature space, and you map it to the output that you want, which here might be your land cover classes. Something that we've known, though, for a really long time is that as we make these networks deeper and deeper and deeper, they can take into account more spatial context, which is one of the key differentiating factors between convolutional neural networks and per pixel approaches like random forests. So every time that you subsequently apply a 3x3 convolution, you are taking into account more spatial context around a centered pixel. So the first convolution looks at 3x3, and then the next convolution looks at 3x3 windows of the first 3x3. So it's looking at a 5x5 window, and then a 7x7, and then a 9x9, and so on. But early in, I think this paper is from 2019, some researchers looked at how much spatial context is actually taken into consideration by these deeper convolutional neural networks, and they found that even though the theoretical receptive field size might be really, really large, most of the models, so here if this is the theoretical receptive field size, most of the models are actually only taking into context very limited areas when they're making their weight updates. And so this is not actually a linear scaling like it was expected to be. It turns out that this is more of a Gaussian kernel that's centered around the input rather than actually taking into consideration the theoretical receptive field. So what that means is that convolutional neural networks are limited in their ability to take in spatial context, is really the takeaway from this slide. Vision transformers, on the other hand, they split the input into 16 by 16 patches. So you take a large input image, you split it into smaller patches, and then each patch has an attention mechanism that enables it to reweight its embeddings based on every other patch in the image. So theoretically, this allows you to have an infinite receptive field with no vanishing gradients and no problem here where your receptive field is smaller than you expect it to be, because a image patch that is all the way down here can attend to an image patch that's all the way up here without consideration for the distance that's between the image patches. So what this lets vision transformers do is have this sort of theoretically infinite receptive field. There's some extra details here that I put if you're interested, that I always find useful for vision transformers. The positionality within a patch, it can be a problem with vision transformers, right? Because you're taking a 16 by 16 input, you're flattening it to a one-dimensional feature space, and then you ultimately want a high-resolution output. So one trick there is to make sure that that feature space is a higher dimension than your total input is, because then you can theoretically memorize the entire input. But this is actually something that's been around for a really long time. So transformers came out in NIPS in 2017 with the Attention is All You Need paper. And vision transformers came out in ICLR in 2021 with a paper called An Image is Worth 16 Words. So these approaches have been out for quite a number of years now, but now they're becoming very popular because of the introduction of foundation models. So there's a couple reasons why we differentiate foundation models from vision transformers, and I think it's really useful to spend the extra 2 or 3 minutes to understand why foundation models are even necessary. So I have 2 figures from a paper here that I think are really, really incredible to distill this information. First, we want to understand, well, why do we want to have vision transformers anyways, instead of just relying on a convolutional neural network? And the biggest thing is that vision transformers actually end up being much more robust and generalizing much better than convolutional neural networks. In a way that you can estimate how well a model is going to generalize is you can say, or you can track what's the accuracy of the model if you remove a single unit, right? Because each of these models are taking an input, they're mapping it to a high dimensional feature space. And the importance of a single unit in that high dimensional feature space can be a proxy for whether that model is overfitting or is generalizing well. So if you have, say, 128 unit feature space, and you remove one of them and you make it 127 units after training the model, how much accuracy do you lose? With a convolutional neural network, you lose a lot. So if you lose a single input, you can have a above 15% accuracy drop sometimes, which means that the model is learning one specific unit within that feature space can be incredibly, incredibly important. With vision transformers, they're much less reliant on an individual feature within their feature space that they're learning. And this is like a tremendous difference. So this sort of allows us to understand that the feature spaces and the embeddings that you can get from a vision transformer are actually much more generalizable and much more descriptive of the input than we can get from a convolutional neural network. We also know that vision transformers ensemble their feature maps, and that this can improve training stability of large parameter models. So in order to get a high theoretical receptive field from a convolutional neural network, one way to do that is just to make it like 200 layers deep. So like a ResNet 200 is going to have I don't know what the number is, like a 300 pixel receptive field. But they become very, very difficult to train as you make them deeper and deeper and deeper. And this figure here sort of differentiates between convolutional neural networks and vision transformers by looking at the feature map variance between the two of them. So what we know is that when you do a pooling operation in a convolutional neural network, you should be reducing the variance of your feature maps if you are averaging them, right? Because averaging reduces variance. And as you make a deeper model, ResNets actually do not reduce the feature map variance, whereas vision transformers do, and the scale at which they do is about an order of magnitude compared to a similarly sized ResNet. So what that means is that it becomes much more tangible to train a model that has 600 million parameters versus a model that has 20 million parameters. So the scalability and the size of the model that you can have is just much more for a vision transformer than it is for a convolutional neural network. And it's due to this ability of the vision transformer to reduce the variance of the feature map as it gets deeper. So this is all well and good, right? But the problem here is that the initial stages of training a vision transformer are really, really difficult. So when you go to make a convolutional neural network or any deep learning approach, you are randomly initializing your model, and you are expecting to have a convex loss landscape where you start at some high point of loss randomly, and then you can incrementally move towards a global minima in your loss landscape. Well, it turns out that there's been a lot of research that's shown that when you initialize a vision transformer, you are not guaranteed to have not guaranteed to have a convex loss landscape. So that means is when you initialize a vision transformer, you can be immediately stuck in a local minimum and then not be able to reach a global minima, and then your training diverges and you basically don't get a model. Whereas when you initialize a convolutional neural network, you are almost guaranteed to have a near convex loss landscape, which means you can take any neural network, any convolutional neural network, apply a He initialization, and have some sort of guarantee that you can reach a global minima. When you initialize a vision transformer, there is no guarantee that you have a convex loss landscape. And actually, in most cases, when you randomly initialize a vision transformer, your loss landscape is going to be non-convex, and you're going to be stuck in a local minimum. So what that means is that these early stages of training a vision transformer are actually really, really difficult, despite having these benefits of having reduced variance in your feature maps and having more generalizable feature embeddings. So what this means is that we need to have foundation models, and this is why foundation models have gotten so popular over the past year or two, is that they really stabilize that early training of a vision transformer. So there's a number of reasons that we ask some certain questions for why vision transformers can be useful for a task. One of them is they give you a lower resolution feature space, a lower spatial resolution in the feature embeddings. So if you have a 10-meter input, your feature maps are going to be 40 meters from a vision transformer just because of how they work. We think about using vision transformers if your convolutional model overfits and does not generalize to a small data set. And we think about using vision transformers if your domain task really needs large receptive fields. So going back to this, if this is a problem where you think that whether a pixel is a wetland or a forest is dependent on a really large, like 300 by 300 receptive field or something like that, then vision transformers can be really helpful. So to introduce foundation models, we consider foundation models pre-training a vision transformer on a really large-scale self-supervised task or on multiple large-scale benchmark data sets in order to deal with this problem, in order to actually get a vision transformer that can reach a global minimum in the loss landscape. There's a couple different approaches, and maybe those of us who are familiar with foundation models know that there's been a huge proliferation of them within the past really 6 months. I see them in three kind of categories. One of them are multimodal foundation models, where you take a vision transformer and you train it on multiple target data sets at once. So this might be Big EarthNet or Eurosat or things like that. And some examples of this are Spectral GPT and SATLAS. There's self-supervised masked autoencoder foundation models, where you train a vision transformer with a masked autoencoder. So Clay is an example of this. And then there's self-supervised contrastive foundation models, which train a VIT with contrastive loss. And Dino is an example of this. So to really quickly differentiate these, here is an example of a multimodal foundation model, where you take your transformer and you train it to do multiple tasks at once. So you're training this one to do segmentation, point prediction, pixel regression, line prediction, classification, object detection all at once. And the idea is that having multiple targets to begin with can help deal with this problem here of having a non-convex loss, right? If we have 8 different loss landscapes, then maybe at different stages of training, different ones of them will be more convex. The other approach is to take your input and mask parts of it here. So here you take like a Sentinel-2 image and you zero out some random parts of the input. And then you train an autoencoder to fill in, to in-paint those gaps. And you do this with millions and millions and millions of images. And there are ways to more or less ensure that this becomes a convex optimization problem. And then the third approach is to do contrastive loss, which is what we've taken with our work, where you take a teacher model and a student model and you have them do different things. So I'll touch on this now in the next slide. So what we did in our paper was we did a really large scale self-supervised vision transformer. We used 18 million image patches of MAXAR data, and we trained this model across 17,000 V100 GPU hours using 64 GPUs for about 2 weeks. And the task here is to train 2 vision transformers at the same time. We train a teacher model and a student model. The teacher model gets these large crops randomly from one input image, and the student model gets these small crops randomly from within an input image. And we do 2 things. One, we want to make sure that the embeddings that are extracted and learned from large patches here and from small patches here, if they're from within the same image, need to be similar. So we penalize the model based upon how dissimilar these feature representations are. And we would expect that the feature map of a small crop that's located entirely within a large crop would be more similar to the large crop's feature space than one that is without. So there's a distance weighting here too, so that we are saying that if you look at an arbitrarily sized large crop and an arbitrarily sized small crop, they need to be more similar if there's a spatial overlap, but the model isn't told whether there's a spatial overlap. So this incentivizes the model to encode positionality and similarity to ensure that feature space embeddings for pixels and areas that are closer together are more similar than the feature embeddings for areas that are further apart. Then we also mask or randomly zero out some of the student inputs, and we maintain this loss between the feature spaces of the teacher and the student model. So we're expecting the teacher model here to be able to teach the student model how to fill in those gaps. And again, in some cases, that local crop is within the larger crop. So the model has to be able to learn, well, is this local crop that's been masked out something that should be within this image? And if it is, can we just take the larger crop and teach the student model to generate what the teacher model can see? So this is all just a way of doing self-supervised, really large-scale feature learning on 18 million images. And then what we do is we nix the student VIT, and we take the encoder, the teacher vision transformer, we freeze it, and then now from our input image, the embeddings that are given to us by this foundation model get used in order to train our downstream task, which is to do canopy height mapping. So all of this whole process is, again, mostly done to get around this problem of, if you try to train this from scratch, you start out with non-convex loss and your model doesn't train. So this approach is called Dino V2. This is a self-supervised vision approach that Meta released over the past couple of months. It's led to state-of-the-art performance in depth estimation, in doing dense masking, in doing instance retrieval, in doing instance segmentation, and in doing sparse matching. So we saw the state-of-the-art approaches here or state-of-the-art results on doing depth estimation. And we thought, well, depth estimation in an RGB image is kind of similar to doing canopy height mapping in an RGB satellite image. And if the self-supervised Dino approach can lead to state-of-the-art approaches or state-of-the-art results in depth estimation, maybe it can also help us make generalizable canopy height maps. I'm not going to go through all of these slides, but I put some more slides here for reference of different parts of the Dino V2 paper that I found to be really helpful. So these will be in the slides. And now the next step that we're doing is thinking through how we can see this model not just as a canopy height model, but as a foundational model for being able to train high-resolution deep learning models. So what we're doing is we're taking this teacher model that we spent all of this 17,000 GPU hours to train and saying, well, if we freeze it, can we apply that model to do other downstream tasks? So the downstream task that we're really interested in is object detection and instance segmentation. So we want to be able to count trees. We want to be able to map the canopy height of trees, and we want to be able to count the number of trees so that we can ultimately get to a point of estimating carbon. So this is kind of, at the moment, what this approach looks like. Here, these are different restoration sites. These two here are in the Albertine Rift in Rwanda. This is in the Great Rift Valley in Kenya here. And these two ones here are in the Savannah Zone in Ghana. And these are trees. Some of these are pre-existing trees. Some of these are trees that are Terra Fund. The financing has paid for the planting of. We're getting to a point where we can make these really generalizable object detection models to be able to count trees with quite limited training data. Is really the goal here. Here's just a couple more screenshots of what these outputs look like, where we're able to again attach bounding boxes to trees. In many cases, even these very small saplings that are around a meter in canopy diameter. Here's another example in an open source, open canopy forest in Kenya. And this brings us to, well, what's our research experiment that we're trying to figure out? So the way that that our team has really set this up is we think about these 5 different modular aspects of making an object detector or making a pixel regression. We think about the encoder or the backbone, the decoder, how the model is pre-trained or self-supervised, how we're doing domain transfer, and how we're fine-tuning. So we're at a point now where we are doing rigorous comparisons of these different approaches, comparing foundation models and non-foundation models with regards to their ability to map canopy height and tree count. So what I've been showing is taking our DynaV2 vision transformer, attaching a VIT detector. That vision transformer is pre-trained on this DynaV2 SSL approach. We are working with Deep Forest and University of Florida on doing domain transfer from pixel regression to object detection, and then fine-tuning it on individually labeled trees or ground data for each of these projects. And then we're also now connecting these approaches with field data. So we have been working with David Skoll's research group at Michigan State University for about a year now to go out into these different landscapes and these projects and collect data for individual trees, georeference data for individual trees, so the species, the DBH, the height, the crown diameter, things like that across currently across Malawi, Rwanda, and Kenya. Now we're about to be doing this in, I think, 20 or 30 more sites. And we're getting georeference photos, in many cases also drone imagery, and GPS tagged coordinates of trees within these landscapes where we can have all of these really granular data. So it's going to help us to validate the tree count and the canopy height mapping approach quite well in these landscapes where we are really interested in being able to track the progress of restoration. And we're working with David Skoll's team to establish relationships between DBH, crown diameter, height, and carbon through allometric equations for these different species on these different restoration sites. So that's sort of a summarization of where we are currently at. We're about to release these half-meter canopy height maps for 2020 for most of the planet. The actual code to do inference and to continue to continue fine-tuning a model is available on Facebook Research's GitHub. This is a MIT or Apache 2 actually license. So it's quite open source. And now that we have done all of this work, our next steps are really to think through how we can really rigorously get to a point where we have an open source tree counting and canopy height mapping model that has been rigorously tested against different approaches, either foundation models or not foundation models. And to do that, we're now working with Ben Weinstein and the Deep Forest Group at University of Florida to support the development of a benchmark data set for doing airborne machine learning for individual tree crown detection. So our goal is in the next year or so to release 1 million tree locations that have been annotated by humans to serve as a benchmark for training and validating individual tree crown and tree counting approaches. So this will be open source. Look forward to sharing more information on this when this is available. We're working on benchmarking these approaches. So we're comparing the accuracy of different combinations of foundation models and non-foundation models to do object detection, segmentation, pixel regression of canopy height for planted trees and for baseline trees across our portfolio of now 152 projects across Africa. And we're working on setting up research to do active learning, one-shot detection, and semi-supervised fine-tuning so that we can rapidly adapt this baseline sort of global model based on field data. So where we have our foundational VIT and a object detector that we've trained attached to that in areas where the predictions aren't great or where the input image quality is maybe not very good. We're working on using tools like grounded SAM and some other approaches to doing active learning and one-shot object detection in order to utilize other foundation models to help bridge the gap between field data and our remote sensing data. So the way that this works is taking field GPS coordinates of trees and priming a foundation model like grounded SAM to extract the embeddings from that model based on those GPS coordinates and to use that as input for an active learning research scenario. And then finally, or not second to last, we're working on connecting our canopy height data, our tree count data, and our field inventory data to measure per site above ground woody carbon sequestration with an overall goal of being able to monitor the total numbers of trees that have been restored, the total area of land that has been restored, and the total carbon that has been sequestered by these projects across the different landscapes. Lastly, my team also works on developing annual tree cover gain and tree cover loss data with Sentinel-2 and Sentinel-1. So last year we released our 2020 tree cover data set for the tropics. This was published in Remote Sensing of Environment. The title of the paper is here. And we're currently working on developing annual loss and gain data based on this approach using monthly composites of Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2. And the last step of sort of bringing everything together is we're connecting our canopy height data, our tree count data and modeling approach, our field inventory data with the Sentinel-1 and 2 product in order to sort of marriage the tree count and tree height approaches with an understanding of the area of tree cover gain. So this is a sneak peek of what this tree cover gain and loss data set looks like here in Ghana, where I don't have the legend here, but losses, the year of loss is encoded in shades of pink to red. The year of gain, tree cover gain, is encoded in shades of purple, and rotation here is in yellow. So this is data that we hope to be able to release to beta users and to people who work with us closely within the next couple of months. But for the TerraFund applications, what we're working on is connecting this tree cover gain data with our tree count data and our canopy height data, where we can see, for instance, here that we can count the numbers of trees that have been planted on this restoration site. And we can see here in pink the year that Sentinel-2 can detect a tree cover gain there, and then be able to sort of think this through as a multimodal, multi-sensor approach to be able to sort of fill in the edge cases where we maybe, might not have a MAXAR image in order to count the trees, but we'll always have a Sentinel image to be able to identify the area that we have seen tree cover gain. So I realize this has been a lot. I've touched on a lot of different topics. I always find it personally more useful when I attend other people's talks just to see what they're currently working on and hear a little bit about the decisions that they're trying to make as researchers for why they chose the approaches that they chose. So I hope that I was able to sort of share or impart a little bit of knowledge about the evolution of foundational vision transformers, when vision transformers are useful, why vision transformers are useful, and how we can use a base vision transformer model to start to a base foundational model to start to answer other questions like tree counts. With that, I also hope that if you are interested in using this data, please go to the GitHub repo and download or clone this repository. There's this inference script will walk you through how to run inference on your own imagery. If you have any questions, I actively respond to the issues here. So just open up an issue. I'll get an email. I'm happy to get in touch with you. We have a lot of ongoing research that we're really interested in, ingesting additional LiDAR data, comparing to different national inventory data sets. So we've compared this canopy height map to national inventory data in Brazil. We're really interested in working individually with countries and researchers to prioritize where we release and update new data. We've started to test annual canopy height, or not annual, but semi-annual canopy height mapping in a couple countries. So we've done time series canopy height maps of Malawi, for instance. We rely, in order to process this data, we rely on Meta's corporate license to the MAXAR archive. So we are not able to release the MAXAR imagery, but any derivative products are open source, and the models that are trained on the derivative products, or the models that are trained to generate the derivative products, are also open source. So the model weights are here, and all of the actual geotiffs of the data that we've produced, not the input data, are all available both as a Earth Engine asset as well. Also on this repository, there should be a link to the AWS Open Data portal where you can download the data in chunks. That is all that I wanted to share with you. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I'll briefly put my email here on screen, john.brandt@thegeo.org. Please reach out to me if you have any questions, burning questions, advice, suggestions for future research, things like that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can have 10 or 15 minutes to answer any questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, if there are any questions, please raise your hand or type it in the chat. Okay, while folks oh, Nick, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent talk. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I guess I live in the redwoods, which are like the tallest trees in the world. There's a huge amount of sort of texture and structure there. I'm wondering about, just sort of your insights into how it's working. Is it perceiving shadows and textures? Is there some kind of photochrometric principle going on? How does it work? Maybe if you could just give me a sort of intuition there.
Yeah, so it definitely is really reliant on the image angle, and we do prioritize images that have specific sun and image angles in order to capitalize on being able to see the side of the tree or to be able to see the shadow. I will say that the version of the data that we have released definitely does underestimate height in the redwoods. I think basically all canopy height maps underestimate height in the redwoods. I understand that, especially within the CONUS, so much of the carbon sequestration that happens in the CONUS is in the old growth forests, and none of the global maps properly allocate or properly reflect that. We have been thinking through other ways to train the model to do better sort of extreme predictions. It's something that we're working on, but yeah, the under prediction of redwoods is definitely a thing, and needs to be figured out.
I have a follow-up question, but I'll give someone else a chance first.
Go ahead, Nick. I didn't see anyone else. Or Emil, was that you? Nope. Go ahead, Nick.
What about ISAT-2 data?
We're currently waiting on MAXAR here with NWRI. There have been people who have been working on ISAT at WRI. I've heard mixed results. I personally haven't tried utilizing ISAT for this approach. I think maybe just due to a capacity or time problem, but hopefully MAXAR will be helpful.
Thank you. I have a question on some of the post-processing that you described in the paper. You talked about using ZI, and I think it was mostly ZI data that you've used. Could you describe why did you have to do that and some of the steps that you've taken in that?
Yeah, we've been changing that approach a little bit internally. I think the biggest reason why we also train ResNet on low resolution JEDI data where we have JEDI data, and we utilize the low resolution output of that. Like we're basically making a 30 meter canopy height product with a ResNet. With JEDI data, it's very similar to how UMD released their 30 meter canopy height products based on JEDI data. And the reason why we have been using that is to try to mitigate some of the problems that we have with the input image quality from MAXAR, especially in an area where you have a really steep cliff or a mountainside. Your MAXAR data, you get one image. Sometimes you get multiple images, but in general, you get one image. If that image is a mountain, is a terrain shadow, you're not going to get a canopy height prediction because you're not going to see the trees. A JEDI-based model can help with that. So we've been doing that to really smooth out some of those edge cases. We've been trying to figure out a research plan for ways to deal with more of those edge cases, because there are quite more edge cases with MAXAR data than there is with Sentinel or Landsat data, right? Because you don't have repeat coverage as frequently, and the analysis ready data from MAXAR is just not as high of a quality as it is for Sentinel or Landsat, because there's such an open source community in Sentinel and Landsat. So what we released in that paper was this using this low resolution JEDI based model in order to smooth out some of those artifacts from the input image quality. I definitely think there's better ways to approach this, and we've been trying to think that through, but that's the reasoning for it.
Thank you.
Any other questions online? Yeah, I've got about 1 billion questions. I think this is first off, just like a barn burner of a talk. Like, this is great. I think we should honestly make a sub channel that is like restoration focused on the TensorFlow Working Group, because I know you've given a talk before and I added that in the channel. So everyone who didn't go to that first talk or didn't get to see it, definitely check that out as well. And I think the background you provided also on sort of the different choices that you made in the modeling is so foundational to, I think, a lot of decisions that folks here in this group are really coming towards this group for, to sort of pick out, what model I should use, why I should do it, what are the rationale. And I think that's a really, really helpful analysis and sort of, a digest of state of the art as well. So thank you so much. I think that is, we're going to put that as the top of the video channel for everyone for probably the next 2 years. It was great. So thank you so much for that. I also linked in Ben Weinstein's talk that he gave last year. It was really great to hear your guys' collaboration, and I'm really excited to see all the things that are going to come out of that. So I didn't have a question there. I just thought I would take a second to be like, this is fantastic.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, we're really excited to be working with Ben. I've known Ben for 5 or 6 years now, and we're just finally getting to a point where we have an actual institutional collaboration. We're really excited. We're going to be updating Deep Forest together, pulling in these foundation models, updating all of the training data, and re-releasing an open source version 2 Deep Forest at the end of this. So look forward to that.
I'm so excited for that.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? We also have in the next call Ben Strong from Genome Earth will be presenting on some of their foundational models. So it's an exciting time to come and listen to this great talk here. John, thank you again. If there are no more questions, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll upload this presentation on the channel and also share John's presentation, paper, and everything again with the email. Thank you again. Have a good rest of the day or evening wherever you are.
Thanks for listening to me talking about vision transformers for a while. Always fun to find a group who will pay attention to that for an hour. Please send me an email if you have any follow-up questions. Happy to talk. Bye, everyone.